I'm going to talk to you for 10 minutes about actually sort of developing emotional pre and post bereavement, but with an interest in how the sort of trauma is perceived perhaps differently. So what do we know? We know autistic and neurodivergent people are far more likely to thrive in an environment that they can, number one, control, and number two, predict. But what we also know from that is that there can be no greater disruption than a bereavement or a life-limiting illness. We also know from sources and research that there are perceptions around the ability to grieve for neurodivergent and autistic people. And we also know that there's the possibility of somebody neglecting emotional needs. So that can sometimes take the guise of protection. That can sometimes take the guise of that somebody's inability to grieve. So what autistic people are more likely to experience is somebody saying, "Oh yeah, just don't tell them what's going on. Don't give them that information. They can't handle it. It's going to, cause difficult behaviors and things like that. Hugely problematic for many reasons, which we'll come on to. But pivotally for this talk today, neurodivergent children are twice as likely to experience bullying at school, for example. So accordingly, what we're talking about is neurodivergent people will probably have a greater experience of trauma than neurotypical people, 50% more likely, which necessitates, I suppose, a bespoke approach when we're supporting autistic people. But the challenges are not necessarily so much that autistic people are 50% more likely to have experienced trauma, but also their perception and trauma experience is different to neurotypical people. So these are the challenges we have. We have certain people who are more likely to have been traumatized, but more likely to experience trauma in a different way. So I'd say about a third of autistic people live with a condition called alexithymia. And alexithymia is basically our inability to separate our emotions. So, for example, if I found out, for example, that somebody I cared about had behaved in a very, very bad way, I would be angry, I would be confused, I'd be demanding explanations, I'd be maybe changing my behavior. There'd be lots and lots of things going on. Whereas somebody with alexithymia may well just be seeing that as a huge sort of, for want of a better word, meltdown inducing huge ball of emotion that I was unable to unpick and perceive. So from a trauma-informed perspective, we're looking at people who possibly don't know how to explain their own trauma, possibly don't understand their trauma or understand it very differently, but pivotally more likely to have experienced trauma than neurotypical people. So in terms of our own ways of supporting autistic and neurodivergent people effectively, we have something called the 4 C's, which are pivotal. Communication is number one. We had to ensure, in order to minimize the impact of the trauma, that we communicate as much as we can in an accurate and concise way. So, for example, remember what I said earlier about people who have a tendency to try and protect neurodivergent people from information in the guise of, protecting them, not telling somebody to protect them. Now, in the interest of considering how utterly ludicrous that is, if you consider the last time you went to the doctors or the last time you went to a hospital and you were all rating test results, if your doctor rang you up and said, "Right, I have some results for you, I'm not going to tell you them now, I've decided to protect you from them." That kind of inability to understand or digest or be told the truth would be absolutely hugely anxiety inducing. There's so much evidence attached to people not being giving information connecting to significant levels of anxiety. So communication, we need to communicate as much as we can in an accurate and concise way. And as previously predicted, this is our second C, we need to support people to control and predict their environment. Okay, at times of anxiety, particularly autistic and neurodivergent people are far more likely to retreat to a space that they can control and predict, which we neurotypical people can find really, really unusual. So, for example, autistic people, the day after finding out somebody's died, may well return to work or school. And when you think about it, why wouldn't you? Because you know that it starts at this time, it finishes at this time we go for lunch, we'll be doing that, at that time we'll be doing that time we'll be doing that, at that time. At a time of chaos, our normal routines can deliver real comfort, even if it is a place of education or work.
Andy, I'm very sorry to interrupt you at this point talking about control. We're just getting some feedback that people are struggling to hear you.
Okay.
So I don't know if you're able to speak a little closer to the microphone. Sorry, Andy.
How's that? Is that better?
It may be a strain on your vocal cords, but it's very nice to hear you.
Oh, no, it's absolutely fine.
What you're sharing is very helpful. I just wanted to make sure everyone could hear it.
Okay, so I will go back. So what we know is that autistic and neurodivergent people are far more likely to thrive in an environment they can control and predict. There can be no greater disruption than bereavement. Perceptions around ability to grieve and neglecting emotional needs sometimes take the guise of protection, in inverted commas. Neurodivergent children are twice as likely to experience bullying at school, and accordingly, neurodivergent people will probably have a greater experience of trauma than neurotypical people, necessitating a bespoke approach. Can you hear that okay? Is that okay? Cool, okay.
Great, thank you.
It was me trying to be all therapeutic and quiet and forget it. I'll just yell at you. Right, okay, so communication, we communicate as much as we can in an accurate and concise way, number one. Number two, we control and predict. So we support the person, giving them as much control over the environment and situation as we can. That might be in the guise of safe spaces. That might be in the guise of people wanting to go alone time. In an education setting, it may be a desk that's just outside that person's normal classroom, something like that. But the more that we can support those environments, because if we look at it as a square, and I forgive me if you don't sort of understand analogies or visuals or things like this, look at life as a square, and everything's tidy and everything's in its right place. But at the top left, we've got the death of a really, really significant person, and it brings chaos. So what we need in the other 3/4 of the square is everything to be in its right place, everything to be where we know and think it is, no more surprises, no more extras. Okay, so what we need to ensure is that controlling and predicting environments is absolutely pivotal at the time of death. Okay, clarity. With our language, we need to make the implicit explicit. We have to mean what we say what we mean, and we need to avoid similes, exaggerations, cliches. We need to avoid any kind of language that isn't completely 100% accurate. And that is really significantly more relevant when we're talking about death, dying, and bereavement, because people will say words like passed away. But if somebody's passed away, that doesn't really mean anything. If somebody's gone to a better place, they could potentially come back. If somebody's lost, they can be found. All of these words and euphemisms that we use for death, dying, and bereavement are no use to autistic and neurodivergent people who take things very literally. So we need clarity. We need consistency as well, which is to do whatever we can to communicate consistently and ensure every other part of life is as normal and routine as possible. And that'll involve maybe communicating with care workers, communicating with people who are education providers and things like that. So if we're supporting, say, somebody pre-bereavement and it's a very religious family who believe in heaven and an afterlife and all of those things, what we absolutely wouldn't do is go in there and sort of say, oh, well, no, after you die, you're either cremated or buried, and that's pretty much all there is to it. We need to make sure that the message that we're delivering is consistent and on message with the same thing that teachers or care workers or anybody else are saying. So what do we need? We need an environment that's controllable and predictable as possible. We need as much certainty as we can offer, changes of circumstances, housing, etc. Because research tells us that autistic and neurodivergent people are far more likely to be socially affected by a death than neurotypical people. So having to move house, having to change job, having a difference in income, things like that. So if we can offer reassurances, you won't have to move house, you won't have to move school, you'll still live in the same place, nobody else is going to leave, all of those things, if we can provide that, that can minimize trauma too. So in terms of our language, we avoid gone to a better place, lost or passed away. We'll use dying, we'll use died, we'll use dead. We can use those words compassionately and explicitly without kind of having this guise of protection for people, which isn't particularly helpful. And even if we could use things like social stories or something to provide schedules for people. So if you use widget symbols or easy read documents or things like that, just to say, do you know what, 8 o'clock is breakfast, 9 o'clock's medication, 10 o'clock's bath time in an inpatient unit setting. If you tell people, they forget. If you show them, they'll remember, but if you involve them, they will understand. So if you give neurodivergent and autistic people an actual involvement in their care provision, they have a far greater chance of minimizing anxiety and having full understanding of what's going on. So in terms of our communication, we need clarity, we need reassurance, and we need to prepare to repeat ourselves to reinforce the message. If we're supporting somebody that doesn't understand sort of social stories or easy read documents, things like that. Social stories are ideal as well. If a client communicates well with social stories, they can be consistent and unchanging. So what I mean by that is, if you have an autistic person who tends to ask the same question 100 times a day, and we have one piece of information where it's all written down what we're doing, when we're going there, and all the rest of it, you can continue to refer that person back to that document rather than continue to make verbal explanations, which can be subject to change. If we get asked the same question 100 times, our responses will change. The way we respond will change. The volume of our responses will change as well. So that highlighting the effect in maintaining consistency. What I'll do is, Sheena, I'm quite happy for you to share my email address if anybody's interested in sort of learning more about social stories and consistent ways of communicating. So to conclude, the 4 C's of supporting neurodivergent people from a trauma-informed basis is: number 1, good communication. Number 2, the ability to control and predict the environment and situation. Number 3, clarity. Number 4, consistency. I thank you. It's been my privilege to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Andy. That was so helpful, so dense in terms of information. I'm sure that when we go to our breakout room,
about bringing yoga and trauma-informed yoga into the hospice setting. So as Sheena outlined, it's a bit of a shock really. I've nearly been qualified for doing social work for 27 years. So I've worked in a variety of different settings, but I've been at St Richard's for nearly 7 years, so as a specialist palliative care social worker. And I've practiced yoga on a personal level for a number of years. And in 2019, I did my 200-hour teach training. And in 2021, I did my 300-hour yoga teach training. And along the way, I've kind of broadened my experience by doing additional training. So I've done training in chair yoga, yoga with children, yoga for cancer, and yoga and mindful yoga and supportive and palliative care and into bereavement. So, and I've done some other training, but they're the main ones that are really relevant to this setting. And I've chosen, rather than going out and teaching out in the community, that I've gradually kind of brought my experience of yoga into St Richard's. So it started off doing some face-to-face seated yoga in our Living Well service. So that's where it started. And then I began to work on a one-to-one basis with patients and connected family members. And I started doing some yoga in our Dragonflies children's group. And then COVID came, and so much of my yoga was supported via virtually, but that still seemed to kind of work. So, so for example, I remember supporting a bereaved wife and daughter, and we did some breathing exercise of breathing awareness just to help calm, so giving them some tools to be a bit more present, because it was a really difficult time for them, losing her husband and a daughter, their dad. And Sheena, I remember in my early stages, she asked me whether I'd do some yoga with somebody she was supporting, and I continue to support her. So we do gentle seated yoga now. We do a lot of breath awareness, which helps her to be a lot more present in where she is. And the transformational thing for her was that she would regularly get up about 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and that's where her day started. And since we did the yoga, she's been sleeping through the night on a consistent basis. So this has continued, and I continue to support her now. And I think she still expresses how it's really helped her. So going forward, now I continue to kind of offer face-to-face yoga for both patients and connected family members, and I've done a little bit more of the group yoga for our children's group. And just naturally, the referrals are coming through, but I have to also remind that principally my role is as a social worker at St Richard's, but I really try and weave into the work that I do as well, kind of providing some tools that can provide people, to connect the body, mind, breath, being more present in what they're doing, and so for me this is so valuable. So more recently, I've enrolled on a 100-hour trauma-informed yoga teacher training course. So I'm still at the earliest stages of this. And I completed a 20-hour trauma sensitive yoga course, a requirement for this particular course. And this is with Susie Renshaw. So she's Trauma Therapy Manchester. And Susie, she outlines how trauma is characterized by being stuck. So she says trauma is not the event that happened, but the lasting adaptations that took place within us, which helped us to survive. And this may manifest in many ways, including anxiety, worry, low mood, depression, fatigue, sleep problems, difficulty in relationships, and intimacy. So, and all of these are very relevant to the hospice setting, really relevant. And she refers to, and so what is trauma-informed yoga? So Susie refers to trauma-informed yoga as being a specialist branch of yoga, which creates a safe supporting space in which can help people recover from the impact of trauma on the body, brain, emotions, and sense of self. So within Susie's trauma-informed yoga offerings, she draws on the 3 phases of trauma recovery. So this could be used alongside other therapy avenues, so for counselling, psychotherapy, all of this. So this could be used alongside this. So the first phase is around stabilisation and safety. So the main aim here is to build the student's capacity to feel safe. So where the body feels so where there's safety, the body and brain can switch from survival mode into healing mode. So this includes the student recognizing what is happening inside them and establishing whether they're in safe mode or survival mode. So which includes fight, flight, freeze, and flop. So by the understanding of the student's status of their nervous system, then you can adopt tools for self-regulation. So as you're all aware, Bessel van der Kolk, there's a quote here from him: simply noticing what you feel fosters regulation, and it helps you to stop trying to ignore what is going on inside. As I often tell my student, the most important phrases in therapy, as in yoga, are notice that and what happens next. Once you start approaching your body with curiosity rather than fear, everything shifts. So this is the core really of around about trauma-informed yoga is about noticing and noticing what's arising. So the second phase is around about processing. So the main aim of this phase is to help the student remain in or quickly return to their window of tolerance. So whilst encountering challenge, distress or discomfort. And then the third stage is around about integration. So the main aim of this phase is to transition into post-traumatic growth. So within trauma-informed yoga, you might also be, incorporating work around the chakras, and there's lots of different things. So from the yoga perspective, you might be drawing onto it, but you also might be using other forms of inquiry. So it might be journaling, for example, drawing, painting, writing a poem, a letter. So all these things can come into this. And it's really important to note that as a trauma-informed yoga teacher, then it's really important that you do your own self-study, noticing your own triggers, and noticing your own survival responses and when they're being triggered. So for myself, that's been a big part of this course, is actually doing my own self-inquiry and being able to access tools which will help my own self-regulation, so that when you are actually with the student, with the person, that you are present and available to them. So that's a big part of it. And at the moment, because I'm in the early stages of my training, the focus of my work is around about the stabilization and the safety part. So I am starting to bring it into my one-to-one sessions with people. So in another talk, then maybe further down the line, when I finish my training, I can actually give you a lot more detailed kind of approach to, detailed information about what I've done. So how is trauma-informed yoga different to other branches of yoga? So a big difference is that it avoids use of directive language. So instead we use intentionally invitational language. So you're emphasizing choice, curiosity and possibility. So I really noticed that going to mainstream yoga class, that is very directive, do this, do that, where this is all very, very invitational. And yoga can be practiced with a felt perception or without a felt perception. So we need to feel trauma to heal. So you could have a really experienced yoga practitioner who might be practicing but may actually without actually inhabiting their body. So it's about noticing and being curious about what's arising. We use a lot of vocabulary around sensation. And that might be drawn together with the student as well, having use of vocabulary. And that's obviously going to be dependent on somebody's age, their developmental age, culture, their individual neurological and language needs. So again, the language, this vocabulary that is really important. And making the covert overt. So being really clear about time boundaries, what you're doing. So just for example, you're walking around a room, you'd be really explicit about that. I'm walking around the room. If you're going to switch a light on or off, you're really making it really clear. If a police car is going by, you actually note it, because these are all potential triggers for somebody who's for somebody working with trauma. And there's no physical adjustment. So in a lot of yoga classes, there may be physical adjustment, but there would be, generally there is no physical adjustment. Again, as this is potentially could be triggering for somebody. So in summary, trauma-informed yoga, it can be face-to-face, it could be in small groups. You could do it virtually as well as face-to-face. it's helping the student to befriend their nervous system. And it's holding space for the student's experience. And it helps reconnection of the body. It helps reconnection with others. And it helps reconnection with the self. So, and it's an opportunity to explore self-regulation. So, and it's important to note that trauma-informed yoga is not a yoga therapy. It's not going to be the magic answer to everything. There's going to be no guarantees, and it may be that it would benefit the student to work alongside a counsellor or another therapist. But I do really believe there's a place amongst supporting people with trauma, and it's very much about a felt experience rather than talking. It's more about feeling. So the student doesn't have to tell you the detail of what's happened, but it's more about exploring how it arises in their body, and working with that. So hopefully that's been a little bit of a taster, just to obviously time doesn't allow to go into the detail of it, but hopefully it's given you a bit of a taste.